Thank you for joining us at this webinar. Our webinar is part of the Net Zero 2024 week, the UK's official National Awareness Week. Today, I will be discussing money and how humankind's oldest technology has the potential and holds the key to help us against the fight in climate change. But first, some introductions. I'm Johan Pretorius. I was born at an atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration of 332 parts per million. In my brief lifetime, that concentration has now risen to 425 parts per million. And that is why I'm here. I am here because I recognize that we have a moral duty to participate in the fight against climate change so that we can create a sustained and thriving economy and civilization for all. But let me start off by saying that I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I believe that economic activity and ambition is not inherently bad, and that it does lead to positive outcomes such as reducing poverty and enhancing our quality of life. But I recognize that those benefits are now coming at a cost to our environment and ultimately to our society, because our economy just doesn't have the capacity or the means to account for these costs incurred by carbon emissions. But I do believe that we can overhaul our economic system so that we can account for these negative impacts, so that it assigns a financial value to our environment, our natural assets, and their utility. And I firmly believe it is possible for us as a society to come together, to reframe the problem, to reimagine the nature of money, so that we can create a prosperous economy for all, and an economy that prioritizes both human well-being while respecting the limits of our planet. All we need to do to achieve this is to reimagine money. And so today I want to explore with you how a new international monetary system based on a carbon-backed currency can solve some of the biggest challenges that we face in the fight in climate change, how it will make it possible for every individual and organization, every economic actor out there to participate in climate action in an easy and in cost-effective manner. How by using a currency based on carbon can provide a massive, huge and new actual source of demand towards the carbon markets so that we can expand them rapidly and create the deep incentives we need for the investments we will require to decarbonize our economy. And how by creating a carbon-backed currency and a new monetary system that surrounds it, we can create the deep links in our economic models that are needed to effectively link our economic goals and our ambitions to the achievement of our sustainability in goals. And ultimately, how a system such as this, a new monetary system where the basis of the money supply is regulated by the amount of carbon mitigation activity and outcomes we achieve, how that provides the whole world with a new mechanism to navigate these competing priorities of human well-being and the planetary boundaries to create a safe, just, and prosperous economy within the limits of our planetary capacities. So I'm going to start off to talk to you a little bit about the history of money, to set the context in terms of how money has evolved, how it's changed over time to meet civilizations' changing needs, and where our money system is today and how it operates. And money's history is interesting. Obviously, before money, when we were small societies and didn't have complex economies and we were simply producing simple goods and services, we just simply relied on the barter trade. It was easy for two economic actors to find each other and match their needs, and they could simply trade goods for services or goods for goods. But as our economies grew and our villages grew into cities and towns, and we started seeing more complex services and goods emerge in our economy, very rapidly it became very difficult for that matching of needs to take place. And we start seeing around 1200 before Christ BC, the emergence of commodity money, where society effectively decided that, well, what we will use for money is we will use those commodities that are inherently valuable to a very wide portion of our community, that is effectively in the common interest of the entire community. So you start seeing the emergence of the use of grain and salt and actual agricultural commodities of the time. But again, the economy keeps growing, and we start becoming wealthier, and the local lords are collecting more taxes, and suddenly there's a need to be able to store value, to accumulate wealth. And for this, the commodity money wasn't great, because obviously grain's perishable, and so is salt. So new solutions had to be found, and we start seeing the emergence of the first banking, and the emergence of coins in places like Turkey and in Egypt, where the local kings and rulers effectively realized that we needed to find a way to standardize trade, and they started using metal objects. And these metal objects were typically representative of certain weights of the underlying commodity, which could be grain or barley, etc. And it was typically stamped with the king's seal, and that allowed people to facilitate trade, because every coin represented an amount, a weight of the underlying valuable commodity, which was the grain or barley, that could be converted at the king's stores. And so you see the emergence of the first grain banks, etc. And coinage and this kind of use of money or representative money continues for quite a long time. And we see the next evolution happen in China. And it's quite interesting why this happened, because the Chinese dynasty was some of the oldest dynasties at the time. It was also really, really large, just geographically. And this provided a big logistical nightmare to the rulers of China, of the Tang dynasty at the time, because it was just really hard to move all of the taxation coins from the outlying districts to the kingdom. And so they make the next evolutionary step by creating paper money. Now money is really super portable. And in this case, there's another transition that sort of subtly happens in our society, is now the paper money is not backed anymore by grain and barley in the stores. They're now actually backed by all of the coins that were in circulation. And this is sort of where the first notion of using currency backed by precious metals sort of starts in China. And because it's so portable, of course, it reaches Europe via the Silk Road. It's hugely successful there, expanding throughout Europe. And for the first time, paper money is seen as a kind of promissory note, and you start seeing the emergence of modern banking in medieval Europe with the large banking families such as the Medici, who now for the first time have the ability to extend credit, because creating credit with simple printing of money is cheap, effective, low friction to do, and it is just based simply on the kind of convertibility of the underlying. And this sort of paper money, backed by several sort of individual banks in Europe, sort of is the de facto standard. But the world is starting to globalize, right? America is discovered, America as an economy begins. There's a whole lot of different colonies that come into existence. The East India trade is opened, and for the first time, the world is confronted with global trade in the far-reaching corners of the earth, where we are trading really complex commodities, sometimes commodities that weren't even seen before. And so gradually you start seeing the emergence of the gold standard, which is effectively where the countries of the world and the territories of the world sort of started agreeing that, look, we should really be basing all our money on one standard underlying precious commodity. And for that, they decided to use gold. So all the money in the world was convertible into a specific weight of gold. And in that manner, there was trust, and different currencies could be exchanged, and it set a means for creating the exchange rates and facilitated global trade. And gold, the gold standard, so where we have money and the money can be converted at the central bank into a specific weight of amount of ounces of gold. The gold standard ushers in an unprecedented period of sort of economic stability and and price stability in the world, and remains in some form the dominant way that we think about our money, that our money is backed by gold. Until about, and it ends in 1971 when Richard Nixon makes the shock announcement, America steps off the gold standard, and we see the emergence of the fiat currency era, which is the one that we're in now, where effectively governments around the world abandoned the convertibility of currency to the underlying. Basically, fiat currency was governments saying, look, this currency is legal tender and you will use it, and you will use it because that is the law. And for the first time, our currency is not underpinned or backed by anything of intrinsic value. We have the central banks that get appointed to adjust the monetary base to try and stimulate the economy or battle inflation. And this has sort of been our currency regime for the last, let's call it 40, 50 years. We have seen some innovations along the time. Of course, the digital world has emerged, and a large portion of the money has moved from being paper and coins that are actually held into the bank and to becoming digitized in the forms of credit cards and digital banking accounts. And even since 2010, 2011, I think Satoshi wrote his seminal paper on Bitcoin and blockchain technology, where a new form of currency was being proposed, and a sort of I guess a reaction to fiat currency and the monopolies that governments obtained when they went off the gold standard in terms of minting money, to give people the power back, and created this decentralized peer-to-peer idea of alternative currencies, so-called cryptocurrencies today. And we are seeing that experiment unfold right in front of our eyes. And that's a sort of long and history of money that I tried to summarize briefly. But I think the key point that I'm trying to make with that sort of story is that money evolves. It has not been static. What we think of money as today hasn't even been in existence for a very long time. We've merely had it for around 4 to 5 decades, and money constantly evolves to meet the changing needs that society has in terms of growing its economy. And I think we are now standing at a new era where we need to rethink again how we think about our money, how our money supply is based, and how a monetary framework works. And the reason that we need this new monetary framework is because for the first time in our history, we as a civilization, thanks to the massive technological advances we've made since the industrial age in 1850 and the huge population growth that we have seen, for the first time we have an economy that is now really overstepping the limits of the boundaries, like the ecological foundations, the ecological planetary limits of our planet. And we cannot continue to grow our economy without taking into account these ecological foundations that we're going to need ultimately if we want to have a sustainable economy in the first place. And climate change is the poster boy. It's also the biggest challenge we face for some of all of these ecological disasters that we are heading to, and it arises directly because of a market failure. Our economy's biggest market failure, its inability to accurately assign value to our ecological foundations that we need. And the reason we overproduce carbon emissions is actually quite easy to understand. Every producer or even the consumer of a good or service that causes carbon emissions, they obviously all gain the benefit from that carbon emission, but they don't suffer or bear any of the societal or environmental cost involved. So if you're gaining all the benefit and you're not sharing in any of the cost, our economy is naturally incentivizing us to overproduce carbon emissions. Carbon emissions live at what economists call external to the economy. They are called externalities because they are not accounted for or costed for. I sometimes think of these things as these liabilities that we are accruing on our balance sheet that is somehow undisclosed. We kind of running a fraud with the planet in a kind of way. But where these unpriced outcomes that the economists call externalities arise, such as carbon emissions, where they take place, governments typically try and solve it. And to their credit, in the last 30 years, they have tried and solved it have tried and attempted to solve it by implementing taxes or regulations, or most famously in the carbon emission space with establishing the carbon markets as a means to try and find a price, as a means for try and find a price for carbon emissions. But I think it is realistic to say that these attempts by our governments and the institutions we rely on to deal with these kind of problems, they have failed dismally. Carbon markets, volumes are still very small, they're very fragmented, illiquid, they remain opaque, and the pricing is far too soft to sort of generate the level of investment that you would need to reduce emissions to the levels that are required to meet the 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade targets as suggested by the International Panel on Climate Change. And the reason that they have failed is obvious, is that they are ultimately based on a compliance value that is set by the government, and this is a global phenomenon. So you need huge amounts of cooperation and agreement in terms of how a system like this would work, how it would be enforced, and how it would be governed. And over the last 30 years, our governments have not found those agreements and the levels of cooperation required to enforce carbon markets and carbon market standards, and to create functioning in carbon markets. And one can understand why. I mean, every nation has competing national interests. They've got different sovereign concerns. There are different levels of development. They've got different political systems, and so it's hard to see how they're going to solve it. And I don't think that they will. I think that they are trapped in a kind of tragedy of the commons themselves, where each nation's incentives are driving them to not take the actions required, the hard actions required, to really put the measures in place to successfully combat climate change. So I think we need a new monetary framework, an economy that does a couple of things. A, bypasses these institutions and governments, and makes it possible for every individual out there, for every organization, for everyone to participate directly in the carbon economy, to participate directly in the carbon markets, and to find ways to democratize this access to the carbon market, so that it makes it for you as an individual very easy and cost effective to take climate action. So I think that's the first thing that we need. The second thing that's going to be absolutely vital is to move beyond compliance and ethics as the driver for establishing value in the carbon markets. We need the humility now to recognize human nature. What we need for carbon markets is we need an actual source of demand, an actual utility, one that's not compliance driven, that's not ethics driven, one that has an actual utility and has an actual economic value to the participants in the economy. And we need to put this within a framework where we are deep linking the human's need and our inherent nature to chase incentive and to achieve economic goals and to be economically ambitious, to link that directly to achieving sustainability goals. And I'm here to tell you that I think that is imminently achievable. I think it's very easily achievable. We just need to reframe the problem a little and reimagine how money works. And history has provided us with an example of how how to do that. And by combining a little bit of history with some of the modern developments that we've seen in money, I think it's very easy to create better money that will ultimately allow us to create a better world. And the use case is simple. We need to think about carbon in the same way that we think about gold. Carbon is the new gold, and carbon assets are, in fact, a very good basis for the money supply. So under the gold standard, we mine gold, and then we use that gold to represent our money supply. And I am suggesting that we think of carbon as the new gold. Instead of mining gold to support the economy, we mine carbon. And when I say carbon, we reduce carbon, we offset carbon, we sequester carbon to support the money supply. And carbon reduction in any form, whether it's an avoidance or whether it's an offset or whether it's a sequestration, actually share properties that are very similar to gold. It has intrinsic value because having a functioning and stable climate has intrinsic value to the human population. Even though there's an abundance of carbon or overabundance of carbon currently in the atmosphere, by its nature it's scarce, and its scarcity is driven by the levels of our economic output. Importantly, it's expensive to produce, and it takes a long time for supply to come on board between initiating some carbon reduction activity and actually realizing it. Takes some time, so the supply is fairly inelastic. And then, like gold, carbon also has very little real world applications, and that naturally means that it's not open to demand shocks. And those two properties, the fact that supply is predictable and the fact that demand is very predictable, is exactly why we use gold, right, as the basis for our money supply. Why? Because the supply is stable, and if the supply is stable, it makes it a good store of value. And to be a good store of value is one of the key requirements to create a good form of money. I will also argue that I think carbon mitigation and is also increasingly attaining cultural significance. The reason we didn't mind using gold as the basis for our money supply is because we attach cultural significance to it. I mean, for thousands of years, we have used gold as a way to signal wealth and power and communicate status, which is something culturally significant to our human civilization. But I think increasingly, carbon mitigation can be used to measure and signal your personal contribution to ensuring a sustainable future. It's a way to communicate your sustainability credentials. And I think that those sustainability credentials is, especially under the younger population and definitely under climate conscious people, starting to attain the same kind of cultural value as what wealth and status used to. And for this reason, we think that carbon can be thought of as the new gold, and therefore we can design a kind of carbon currency for the world where the currency and supply is directly linked to the available amount of carbon mitigation that is achieved. Instead of gold bars in the central bank's reserve, what we have is a set of carbon credits and carbon offsets in the form of reductions or even allowances and sequestrations. And a central authority like a central bank issues the currency in such a way that the currencies is always backed by the equivalent amount of carbon mitigation achieved. In other words, the currency in circulation is always convertible into a certain amount of tonnage of carbon reduction that has been achieved, has been verified, and can be credibly assured. And the way that this works and is very simple, it's very much like the gold standard, is we have the present economy. In the present economy, there are people are busy with transactions, goods and services are exchanging hands between individuals and companies and amongst amongst companies, and in order for that to take place, we are exchanging money. So the more the economy grows, the more the value in the economy, and the more money is required to support that economy and to represent the value in that economy. If that currency supply rule, like under the gold standard, was attached to a commodity such as carbon reduction, if we wanted to expand the economy, or the economy naturally expand, and we would need to expand the money supply, but the only way in this monetary framework we would be able to expand the money supply is if the central bank had the ability to increase its holdings of carbon mitigation outcomes achieved in the form of carbon credits or carbon offsets. So in that way, as individuals and businesses transact in the carbon economy, or transact in the economy with a currency based on carbon, that creates more carbon currency. It creates the need for more carbon currency in circulation, and therefore it transmits demand directly to the carbon markets. And we think this now creates a whole host of benefits for the world at large. It drives positive outcomes for both the planet and actually for the economy, because you're now integrating inherently environmental sustainability into the financial system. Because you're making it superbly simple for everyone with a simple and cost-effective means to take climate action. Because now, simply by continuing with your everyday economic activity, by choosing to use a currency that is backed by carbon and therefore linked to the actual achievement of sustainability goals, it makes it very, very simple for every person out there to take climate action. There's no additional cost to them. There's no change in behavior. We just simply change the type of money that we used. We have now also transformed carbon mitigation and the creation of carbon reductions and carbon sequestrations from something that gets value from ethics and compliance. It is now getting its demand directly from a real world utility, and that is to use it as the backing for currency. And so if we do this, we can do what the gold standard did for gold mining, we can do for carbon mining or the carbon markets. Because the one thing that we do know about humans, and that we can 100% back, is that they will continue to seek naturally to expand the economy, because they are driven by that is their nature. And to expand the economy, we would need more money, and to make more money, if the currency is backed by carbon, we are now directly creating the deep links between achieving economic goals to the achievement of sustainability goals. If you think about it, the market should naturally seek to reduce its carbon footprint simply to maintain a stable money supply. Businesses and individuals will be naturally encouraged to invest more in sustainable practices, because it's now not a cost, it's a source of actual revenue. And there is even some really compelling ideas and thoughts and implications in how this might completely change the way that we value some of our nature-based carbon sinks, some of our most important natural resources, such as forests, natural forests, and the oceans. Because in this monetary framework, those natural resources, they turn from being resources to exploit, they turn into actual carbon mines. They turn into assets that are income yielding, therefore providing society as a large and many countries in the world with an alternative way to monetize their natural resources that is far more sustainable and planet positive. And the implementation of this, strangely enough, should not be complex or difficult at all. I think the prominent central banks like the US government or the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of England, Japan, I think they could take the lead and implement this quite easily and effectively, by simply including carbon mitigation outcome in their mandates. Their current mandates is a dual mandate, typically, to maximize employment and keep prices stable. Why shouldn't that not just simply read maximize employment, keep prices stable, and keep the climate stable, and govern the economy in order to achieve those three goals? Because really, that's what we should be doing. We have no other choice. And the way that they could do that is by simply stating that they will keep carbon mitigation assets on their balance sheet and exchange money for those carbon mitigation assets, such as carbon credits and carbon offsets. In fact, there are several mechanisms that they could implement overnight to achieve this. For instance, simply introducing some fractional carbon reserve system where at least a portion of the money supply is based on the amount of carbon mitigation outcomes that the central bank has achieved by buying and holding amount of carbon credits and carbon offsets on its balance sheet. By telling the market that it will be aligning with its country's nationally determined commitments, and that it will be buying carbon credits and carbon offsets at these levels for the following years at this kind of forward guiding with pricing, will overnight unlock an incredible amount of financing for carbon credit initiatives, because it has now become possible for the central banks to effectively print money in order to buy carbon credits and carbon offsets. They could even just simply say to the commercial banks out there that they would need to, as part of their reserve requirements, maintain a certain minimum level of carbon mitigation outcomes achieved. Otherwise, they could not expand their money supply, and that would naturally incentivize the commercial banks to invest in sustainable activities and projects that provide for decarbonization. In fact, they could even come together, all the central banks, and just decide to use a currency based on a carbon mitigation outcome as the reserve currency, as under the gold standard, instead of the US dollar, as an example. And this could be very easily achieved and done overnight. However, in my opinion, I think it is hard again to see the governments finding the agreement to do that. They face the same collective action dilemma, because any central bank that's brave enough to be a first mover will, by adopting this third mandate, by implication, be putting a governor in terms of how much money supply it can grow, and would potentially put it at itself at disadvantage to some of the other economies. So you would imagine that there would have to be some international cooperation or agreement in terms of how such a system would work. And for the same reasons that the carbon market failed here, I think that is probably not easily done. So, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am an entrepreneur and a businessman, and I like to see action and solutions to the world's problems. The time for talking has definitely ceased. So at Toco, the initiative that myself and my fellow founders sponsor, we have decided to circumvent all of that and to see whether we can establish a independent global currency for individuals out there who want to take climate action that is free from our governments and free from our institutions. It's a global system for global systems in the world who want to take climate action, so that we can start implementing this and start gaining some of the benefits. So we've created the Toco currency, which is really just short for ton of OCO or carbon dioxide, where every Toco in circulation effectively represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent that has been credibly and removed from the atmosphere. The Toco in circulation, or the currency, can be used like any other currency. It can be traded with other currencies. It can be used as a means to perform transactions, everyday transactions for the buying of good or services, or as an alternative store value. The currency in circulation is backed by a portfolio of these carbon mitigation assets in the forms of carbon credits and carbon offsets. These assets are very critically selected. They're put in a portfolio, and they're also adjusted for risk to deal with some of the risks that exist within the carbon market. And this portfolio of assets and the management of these assets are done by the Carbon Reserve, an independent foundation in Switzerland that we've set up, who has been mandated to basically maintain the convertibility of the currency into the underlying carbon credit, and to make certain that the carbon credits that it holds are all high quality assets, so that you can trust in the backing of the currency. And it manages this portfolio on an ongoing basis. And then we've launched a payment system to make it possible for individuals and organizations and business everywhere to access the currency very easily. You just need an internet, and you can start using carbon as money within 3 to 4 minutes of having downloaded the application. And we started this development work about 2 years ago, and we're very, very deep in now. Where we've tested the concept in communities that it's been hugely successful. It far surpassed our expectations. In the communities where we've deployed it, we have seen massive user growth. There's obviously large amounts of pent-up demand by individuals who want to take climate action, but it's just frustrated. I just don't know how to do that. And by being given a easy and simple means to do that, it's very easy for them to adopt the currency, at least for everyday small value transactions, such as buying coffee or having lunch or having your haircut. So we've seen sort of 65% month on month user growth. In our oldest locations where the currency has been, and those cohorts where the currency has been active for more than 8 months, we see up to 30% uptake of the addressable market, penetration of people using the currency. And the currency obviously takes a while to gain utility, because it takes time to build up the partner merchant network. But we've also seen that merchants were quite happy to adopt it, so that they can signal their green credentials to their customers who are concerned. And again, in our oldest cohorts, we see about a 50% penetration on merchants. So that's 1 in every 2 merchants on the street accepting the currency. And if you were to eliminate from that cohort maybe the large corporates and franchises that, for obvious reasons, they have a longer sales cycle and is a little bit more difficult to deal with, that number actually starts approaching 80%. And we were initially worried that the currency would go into circulation and then people would start selling the currency immediately back for fiat, but that's not what we see happen in reality. Some of that happens in the beginning, of course, as people test the system, but in time you start seeing this carbon economy grow. People retain the currency. It starts, the value chains grow deeper. Some employees in the businesses that are accepting the currency start accepting a portion of their salary in the currency. And so the economy grows, and as the economy grows, so must what the carbon credits and the carbon offsets that the Carbon Reserve needs to purchase. And in the one test location where we deployed it, in South Africa, we created so much demand from one single town that we started running out of credible credits to purchase locally and needed to start importing credits. That's the amount of demand that using a currency based on carbon can create. We saw that every new user joining the carbon economy was transmitting 2 tons of fresh carbon mitigation demand to the carbon markets per month. And that is incredible. And just by making climate action easy with something like Toco, so that people can continue their lives and merchants can connect with their customers, and corporates find a fungible means to deal with carbon mitigation. we can harness the transactional economy, we can harness the money demand that is right now and go capture a little bit of market share away from the dollar and away from the euro and away from your local currency. And we don't even need to capture a lot to make a massive impact. And we have done the calculations. We can see that if we can just get one coffee a day, if every adult in Europe, as an example, just used a currency backed in carbon like the Toco to purchase one coffee a day, that would require $30 billion of Tocos to be in circulation to facilitate those transactions. And that would mean that will create $30 billion of fresh demand for carbon mitigation outcomes such as carbon credits and help expand the carbon market. In fact, one coffee a day would grow the voluntary carbon market 15 times. And that is why we are so excited about this solution. And we do believe that there are like-minded individuals out there who want to take climate action, that doesn't think that the economy needs an overhaul, so that it better prices for these environmental outcomes we create as a society, and that we need an economic system that is linking our economic ambitions to our sustainability goals, and that are prepared to literally put their money where their mouths are, and that is behind the environment. And that's why we think that the next evolution for money is to move money from where it's now to better money, to more moral money, money that seeks to expand the economy, but does so with respect for what our planetary boundaries allow us to do. And we think if we can demonstrate this model successfully for a currency based on carbon, it doesn't stop there. It is very easy then to see a world where our money is perhaps based on a whole set of environmental factors that we include, and that is the stability of our climate, as an example, the biodiversity of our natural habitats, the amount of microplastics in the sea, because each and every one of these activities that we need to perform to make certain that we preserve these natural resources of us can be funded very easily if we start including these environmental assets and their state of health into our monetary frameworks. And it's for this reason that we're very happy to now be live in Europe with Toco as a currency. We've just completed the soft launch in Europe, and the currency is transacting in Switzerland and in Denmark as we speak, and we're expanding the merchant network there. Our focus areas at the moment is to build the merchant network and get density of merchants, and therefore enough utility for users in Copenhagen, and in Zurich and some of the smaller towns in Switzerland. And we have a army of like-minded volunteers out there knocking on merchants' doors and telling them about carbon currency and telling them that there is a way for us to change the future. And we will be available in the whole of Europe by the end of the year, as our merchant partner network grows and we can provide sufficient utility for our users. And our stated objective here is, as Toco and trying to tell the world that, we can protect the economy and fix the system, and that carbon is money. We hope to create a couple of thriving communities where using a currency based on carbon to demonstrate to the world that here is a very simple and cost-effective means for us to transform the way we think about our planet, to transform the way we think about our economy, and to provide us with the means to fund our transition to a low carbon economy. And if we can get enough people and enough communities using that, then we can shine a light on the solution, and then maybe we can make the US Fed and the ECB and the Central Bank of Japan take notice, and have them harness the full power of their currencies to drive carbon mitigation further and provide the world with a solution to deal with our pressing environmental problems going into the future. So let me end off by reiterating what I said at the start, is that I think, yes, it is possible for us to create a prosperous economy that prioritizes both human well-being while respecting the planetary bounds. That we do this by reimagining money, that it is possible to create better money, to create a better world. All it needs from you is to put your money where your mouth is and join us on this journey at Toco's. Thank you very much for your time today. I will leave it there. Thank you to everyone.